Welcome to Testing in the Pub.
Hello, thanks for tuning in to this very first Testing in the Pub podcast session with me, Dan Ashby, and Stephen Janaway. In this session, we are going to talk about the conferences of 2013, where we hope to summarise some of the talks that happened and hopefully get a good chat around the key opinions and ideas around these talks. So, the first one that we went to was probably TestBash.
Yeah, way back in March, I think. Yeah,
TestBash was good. How was your experience at talking at TestBash?
it was good. I mean, it was a great opportunity. It was something new for me in terms of that size of stage and that number of audience. So yeah, a little bit daunting. I can't remember a massive amount of the talks that came before me. A little bit about James Back's one, but not an awful lot. And overall, a really good day. Also, a really good opportunity to sit down there with the other speakers, get to chat with them.
Yeah, it was a cracking lineup.
Yeah,
It's a really good lineup.
good opportunity to do the TestBash Raw as well. Although I'm not sure being caught on camera right by the camera doing that was necessarily the best thing. But hey, there you go.
That was classic. Yeah, the talks at TestBash were really good. James's one about Galumphing did sort of solidify in my mind that it is a valid test. Galumphing is valid. It's a,
Yep.
But I've still got a debate in my head about whether it's valuable, because you could spend a lot of time with a shoe on your keyboard and not find anything. So
Yep.
And then even if you find something, it's questionable based on context on whether that's of value.
I think there's a question about credibility as well.
Yeah.
But the shoe test is maybe a specific example of that. I know you've blogged about this as well, but yeah, there is a danger of the profession appearing a little uncredible, and we when we do have tests like sticking shoes on keyboards and the kind of the associated impact that has in terms of what we're actually trying to rally against at the moment, which is essentially to try and see testing seen as a serious profession, a serious craft. I do wonder whether that sort of testing is necessarily the best use of time at the moment. But it's an interesting thing to certainly to see.
Yeah, definitely. That's where I'm saying it's valid, because it can produce an error,
Absolutely.
So anything that can break the system would be a valid test,
It's certainly one that provokes debate.
Right, so what other talks were there? There was
the testing in production, Seth Elliott's talk. I thought was very, very interesting. I mean, I think we're increasingly moving to a way of working where more testing takes place in production, and also more testing takes place not necessarily primarily using testers. I think it's kind of coming around to this testing as an activity way of thinking. And if you start thinking about testing as an activity, for example, then why do you have to exclusively do it before release? Obviously, dependent on the impact on brand, for example, and dependent on your knowledge of the user and how the user perceives the software, and essentially what their criteria are for saying, have we got a problem here or not?
Yeah.
But testing in production is certainly a very, very important tool and a very important direction to move into, and not an easy one to do so, I don't think. So it's very, very interesting to see the level that at Microsoft they're using that, and the sorts of data, the sorts of metrics they're using to track as well in production.
Yeah, I think it totally depends on what software you're testing as well. Because,
absolutely,
yeah, that you have to take that into account. If it's something that's not going to affect anyone, like Facebook, saying that Facebook has an element of storing customer data, so I'd imagine that's what they're focused their in-house testing on. But Facebook certainly do a level of what they call it is dog fooding, which is where they give it to their staff to use.
Yeah, I think that's something like 2 weeks ahead, aren't they?
Yeah,
Facebook stuff.
and then if no major incidents are reported, then they roll it out live. So, and I've worked in applications where we've given it to the customer to use as well, as on a sort of like live basis. So that's another element of testing in production. Yeah, but you're certainly not going to do that with anything medical, for example.
No, I guess that wouldn't be the most clever situation, would it?
Yeah. But the full concept of big data as well,
Yeah.
which is another thing that Seth spoke about. That just fascinates me. Big data. Like I was speaking with a couple of testers within the testing community, and they were talking about fridges can now determine via a camera in the fridge what's in your fridge when you're running out. So it looks at the level of your milk and that sort of stuff, and then it can then send you a message or an email saying you're running low on milk. That's incredible.
Yeah, it is, but then it can also be exploited. I don't know whether you saw the recent story about were they LG? I think maybe I can't remember what manufacturer they were, but there were fridges that have been taken over by spammers and essentially were being used to distribute spam email. And that's I guess danger when you get too far towards an Internet of Things. Is that if everything essentially is connected, then everything has the ability to not only do the things that it was designed for, but a whole bunch of stuff that it wasn't.
Yeah, and that's one thing that if companies are starting to deal with big data, they really have to take security into account.
Yeah. How long before you start? Yeah, there are people paid to security test fridges.
Oh, I know. But you need to think about it.
You do. Yeah,
even if it's storing an email address, that's customer data.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that can be vulnerability there. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think other than that, from a test batch perspective, well, I definitely very much remember Hype Scoots' presentation. I think that really kind of opened me up to the You Are Not So Smart blog and the book and the Invisible Gorilla. There was a lot of stuff there that I hadn't seen before. I found that really fascinating. That really kind of opened my mind to that side of testing, which previously I hadn't really been looking at.
I think that's the side of testing that I've been focusing on for a while, like inattentional blindness and the psychology behind it all.
Yep.
That fascinates me to no end.
So let's maybe move on from Test Bash. Have a think about some of the other conferences. So I know you went to Agile Testing Days.
Yeah.
It's a really big, really well renowned conference.
It's the best conference I've been to, hands down so far. It's the biggest conference I've been to for testing as well. There was just so much going on. It was difficult to take everything in with it being so fast paced, but there was huge variety. There was lots of talks, there was lots of workshops, there was a test lab, there was plenty of socialising. It was just incredible. Some of the talks were really good. The opening keynote was titled Agile Testing is Nonsense, which is a very bold statement at an Agile testing event.
It's a very good keynote title to have, isn't it? It makes you think before you've even seen it. It certainly makes you turn up, which I guess is the main reason to have a catchy title.
Yeah. But then he went on to say that it's nonsense because Agile is testing, and he went into his thinking around this statement. But one thing that was really interesting from that was that he highlighted three main dysfunctions of any system, which he classed as burden, unnecessary variations, and wasteful activities. And thinking about that just in day-to-day work with Agile, people think that they constantly have to update, constantly have to change their Agile boards, their stand-ups to be in a certain format. So a lot of that, what he was saying there, does make sense. Another great talk was Tony Bruce's talk, being a real team member. Tony also spoke at the Test Bash as well. I think it was a similar talk as well. But
he did towards the end of the day.
Yeah, I really like Tony's style when he speaks. He's it's kind of very laid back, but so engaging as well.
Yeah, very inclusive. I think a lot of Tony's talks, they only work if the if the audience engages, and the audience does engage because he's got that sort of style that makes them engage.
Yeah. With a little bit of comedy in there as well, which is good. I like Tony's style. And then another great talk was Graham Thomas's talk about natural born testers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's about essentially people have the testing gene or they don't have the testing gene.
Okay, interesting.
I believe that people have a testing gene because of what I see from testers in the community. Everybody's so enthusiastic about it, and they don't just have a 9-to-5 job or even just have the career. They're also very, very involved in testing outside of the work, you know. So a lot of people that I know have been blogging or writing articles or trying to get involved in speaking or even just reading blogs and books outside. If they're investing their own time and money, then that's kind of more than just a career, right?
Yeah, I think it is what kind of separates people who do something for a job against those who don't. I mean, let's not forget there are a lot of testers who do just do it for a job, and a lot of people who fall into testing that end up just kind of doing it for a job. And I think in some cases that's kind of what's cheapened the craft a little bit in the past, and that's certainly something I think as anyone in the testing community's got a need to kind of bring those sorts of people up and train and educate and inspire those people as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's the people that wouldn't have the testing gene though. You know, they might form. I don't know. Maybe I've got this wrong. Actually, maybe they could sort of learn so much and get so much involved with it that it becomes them. You know, and they form this gene, if we want to call it a gene.
I suppose calling it a gene implies that it's you're born with it or you're not born with it, and but interestingly, taken at its most kind of literal, it also then tends to imply that it can then be passed on, but only to one's offspring. So are my kids going to end up as testers? I don't know.
Yes, that's a given.
My little boy's good at breaking stuff, but
but even that, like when I was younger, certainly, I used to take things apart, find out how they worked, and put them back together again. You know, and investigate things, and I used to have the magnifying glasses and out looking in the garden for insects and things like that. That's investigating.
Yeah.
So even at that very young age, there's things that happened then that I can associate to software testing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another talk from Agile Testing Days that was really good about big data, speaking about big data, was Adam Knight's talk. And he spoke about, it was entitled Big Data Small Sprint, which he was going on about his company who's really involved in big data. So that was a great talk there as well. But he also mentioned T-shaped testers and square-shaped teams, which is something that I believe in as well. But square-shaped teams was a new one for me.
Yeah, that's not one I've heard the T-shaped testers before, but certainly not square-shaped teams.
So it's basically taking many T-shaped testers and building the square-shaped team with the testers having different skill sets, expertise in.
Yeah. Kind of makes sense when you think about it, doesn't it?
Definitely. But other highlights were that, the people, met some amazing people. Pete Wallen, what a great guy Pete is. He had a fair few puzzles for us all to try out. So got to play some new puzzles and games. James Lindsay, I'd met James before, but I got to catch up with him again, and he had his test lab, which you could just go and do some testing and win some badges and have some good chat. And then with the socialising, there was plenty of other great testing chat going on with some amazing testers.
Yeah, I think that's really the benefit of conferences. I mean, I went to Eurostar and that was my kind of primary takeaway as well. I think it was a very, very it was great to basically spend some time in the company of either those who inspire you or frankly those who are doing some pretty cool stuff that you just didn't know about, that you never met before. I think the the testing community in the UK is pretty vibrant, but it's relatively narrow. Whereas you go to somewhere like Agile Testing Days, like Eurostar, you get to meet so many testers from so many different parts of the world, and they all have their own ideas. And it's really great to kind of feed off that and get those ideas and also put some of yours forward as well.
Definitely.
I think the key thing that came from me from Eurostar is very much about treating testing as an activity rather than treating testing almost as a role. So a couple of the presentations I thought were really, really good. There was Improve the Process by Taking Control that Amy Phillips did around how Songkick went over to continuous deployment, continuous delivery. And then Rob Lambert also did another one about moving to weekly releases and how that New Voice Media moved from large monolithic releases to much quicker releases, much shorter release times, and what the impact there was for testing. And in both of those cases, the real impact was that testing became a team activity, and particularly around the automation, that was where they both managed to kind of get that hook to the developers and get the developers involved and get everybody caring about quality, not just throwing things at a small number of testers and then sort of saying, job done, now you release it for me, or you tell me whether it's good and then we release it.
It is really interesting because it is a mindset. You have to have your full team in that mindset. So did Robert Amy mention about difficult scenarios around about developers or anyone else on the team having that, coming across that mindset?
Amy did a little bit in terms of how steps that she'd put in place in order to not only work with developers, and her key learning there was to basically approach those developers one-on-one, do it individually, don't attempt to solve essentially the whole team's problem with the whole team at the same time. So treat each of those developers differently, look at how you can influence those developers, look at what is really, really important to them, and it's not always the same thing, even if the goal is the same. Less so, I think, from Rob's talk. It seemed for one reason or another, the way the thing worked at New Voice Media was that most things seemed to have gone okay.
Well,
let's kind of see. Exactly, but I think in both of those, what was kind of interesting and kind of linked to another presentation, a keynote that Keith Klein did about overcoming dissonance, and both Rob and Amy had a relatively easy job convincing the business that the continuous deployment and that the testing that went with that was the right thing to do, whereas Keith's talk was very much around overcoming organisational bias towards testing,
right,
and kind of debunking essentially some of the myths that if you just tell senior management that you're going to get better quality or you're going to get quicker times or it's going to be overall more efficient, that's not necessarily going to make a difference. And his talk was very much about making sure that you frame any of that discussion, frame any of that influence in language and that's right for the audience. So one of his key takeaways was you need to understand how the company works, and you need to understand to the level of kind of very roughly understanding the financials of the company and so on, so that you or your manager can have those right levels of discussion.
Yeah.
And you can frame the need for, say, continuous deployment in language that senior management, directors, CEOs can understand.
I think influence is a key word there as well.
Absolutely.
Because that should be a key skill for any tester, I think.
Yes.
Influence skills. Whether it's talking about difficult developers, bringing them into the mindset with them being involved in testing as well as an activity, or whether it's with the stakeholders or senior management, customers or users. You have to mould your communication skills around about who you're speaking to, and use your influence skills to kind of get them on side with what you're saying. You know?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's all about how you frame it, I think, as well. And the kind of the key takeaway, it being that don't assume that everybody is the same, because everybody is not, and how you approach people, how you influence people, is different, and it needs to be very contextual.
Yep.
I think as well, on a completely different note, I'd say probably my fourth favourite from the presentations was one called "Fooled by Unknown Unknowns." So it was actually ended up being the do-over session at Eurostar as well. The idea of a do-over session is that one of the presenters gets to repeat their presentation.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because you know the classic thing when you go to a conference, it's a bit like going to a music festival. You look at all the different workshops and presentations you want to go to, and you realise at least 3 of them clash with each other.
Yeah.
And you're never going to get to see all of them. So Eurostar had this idea of a do-over session.
I like that idea. That was one of the downsides of Agile Testing Days, is that there was so many good talks on at one time, and you had to pick one.
Yeah.
So that was difficult. But do-over sessions sound.
Yeah, no, it was good. I mean, I think the presentation itself was great, because it was more around a tester coming into a project not as experienced as she could be, and it was basically her story of what went well in the project and what didn't go well and why, and the learnings from it. And I think those sorts of presentations are really, really, really good. It's really good to see people stand up and essentially tell stories.
Yeah, I think that they're very valuable, because it gives people the opportunity to learn from someone else's experience. So rather than a talk where it's just someone standing up front telling you about a new fad or a new tool, they're actually talking about their own experiences that they've went through and how they've overcome them and the different paths that they've taken. I quite like talks like that. So she was talking about orders of ignorance.
Not necessarily orders of ignorance, but she was talking specifically about Alexander Kasapu. I think I probably mispronounced that massively. No, she was talking primarily around what the challenges that there were, particularly around things like communication in the project, around unclear requirements, around an offshore aspect of part of the team, and the fact that she came into the team quite late. And what was kind of interesting is that it was framed very much in what she did know and what she didn't know, and then what she didn't know she didn't know. And that was kind of where the fooled by unknown unknowns comes from.
Okay.
So it's very kind of basically that benefit of hindsight, that ability to then look back and say, well, this is what I learned at that time. I didn't know I needed to ask that question. And I think framing a presentation like that is really, really useful for the audience, because there's probably people in that audience who are thinking, oh, hang on a minute, I didn't know I needed to ask that either, and actually that's really, really relevant to the project I'm working on. It gives you that confidence, essentially, to sometimes challenge things. You go to a conference, you see a presentation at a conference, or you talk to someone at a conference, and they start to kind of, either they challenge you directly or they challenge you indirectly via what they're talking about in their presentation. It can kind of give you that confidence to then go back to where you work and say, hang on a minute, is this kind of right? It's like, I don't know, let's use an example. All tests should be automated. Now, that's exactly, you laugh. But it's a claim that's made quite often. It's this weird perceived like test automation nirvana that one can get to, which is nonsense. But if you haven't had a chance to really form your opinion and form your response to that, it can really help to go to a presentation, say at a conference, hear a speaker get up there and debunk that myth and do that very, very clearly, and you can then learn from that, and that really gives you then some power to go back into your organisation, maybe talk to a product manager or I don't know, a head of development or something, and say, well, hang on, no, we shouldn't automate everything, and this is why. And you can have some confidence because you've because of who you've heard it from and maybe some discussions you've had afterwards. I mean, the automation one is a good example. It was Ian McCowart did a talk at Eurostar around automation time to change up models, and that was one of the key takeaways from that. Not the only key takeaway by any means, but it was definitely one of the key takeaways. He gave a lot of very, very useful information to the audience that essentially would allow them to go back into their organisations and debunk that myth of automation saves the world. It's very valuable, but it ain't going to save the world.
Oh, of course, yeah. I got into a good debate about full automation versus manual testing, if you want to call it manual testing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm not sure whether the idea of sapient testing has put forward by Back and Bolton. It's
I like the name sapient testing, but if you talk about it to anyone else outside of the context-driven school of testing, they don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
so you always have to refer back to manual testing because that's the terminology that they all use.
Yeah, I suppose it's little by little. The more we start using terminology from the context-driven school of testing, the more that gets accepted, and then slowly but surely, then we don't end up having to say manual testing and functional and non-functional testing.
Yeah.
Cool. So, other conferences from 2013, London Tester Gathering Workshop. Certainly a very good couple of days. From a security testing perspective, I learned a heck of a lot from those workshops. So the workshops done by Martin Hall, done by Bill Matthews around mobile.
Yep.
Very, very important. And then Alan Richardson's proxy workshop as well.
That was great. I really liked that.
I think what was really good about the London Tester Gathering workshops was the fact that they were just workshops. They were very, very hands-on, and whilst you got all the advantages of being around a number of other good testers, you also got to actually learn hands-on from the presenters and also from whoever you decided to pair up with. So you got a lot of good information, but you also got some actual practical knowledge rather than just theoretical.
Yeah. That's a good roundup of the conferences.
Absolutely, and I think if we look forward to kind of 2014, there's the conferences we've spoken about are obviously happening again.
Yeah.
Let's Test is definitely one to attend. There's Test Bash 3.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely looking forward to that one. There's some others that I've not heard of before that I'm hoping to see whether I can get to. The Nordic Testing Days is a new one for me.
The Mobile App Europe as well.
Absolutely. Romanian Testing Days. That's a new one.
Are you speaking at any?
I'm not at the moment that I know of, but if any conference organisers wish to book me, then I am available for very reasonable rates.
So this is the end of our first podcast session, Steve.
Absolutely, Dan.
It's been great.
Nice.
Here's to many more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the plan for these definitely going forwards is to have a much more discussion generally about software testing, and hopefully discussions that others will find useful. So until next time.